All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're diving deep into Water Margin, a classic Chinese novel that's absolutely bursting with outlaws and rebellion and epic battle. You know, the kind of stuff that gets your heart racing.
It's one of those stories that just grabs you and won't let go.
Right.
And for good reason.
Right. And we've got excerpts from the Wikipedia page to guide us, so let's see what we can uncover. Okay, so Water Margin, it's also known as Outlaws of the Marsh, and All Men Are Brothers. Like, wow, those titles alone, right? They kind of tell you what you're in for. And get this, it's considered one of the four classic novels of Chinese literature. I mean, that's a big deal, right?
Huge. It's like, think of Shakespeare. Water Margin is on that level in Chinese culture. It shaped everything, the language, stories, even values.
Wow, so we're talking a cultural phenomenon, not just a book.
Absolutely.
Okay, so set the scene for us. It takes place in the Northern Song Dynasty around 1120. What was going on in China back then? What kind of world gave birth to this story?
Imagine a society where corruption was just rampant. Officials exploiting people. Justice was basically non-existent for a lot of folks.
Ah, so the perfect breeding ground for a band of outlaws.
Exactly. And the Song Dynasty, even with all its advancements, art and technology and all that, it was also facing like internal struggles and threats from outside. So there was this underlying current of discontent, this yearning for something different. That's the soil where Water Margin takes root.
And it's based on real events too, right? I mean, that just adds another layer to it, doesn't it?
Totally. The story of Song Jiang and his 36 companions, it was passed down orally, embellished through storytelling, and then it ended up in plays before, becoming this epic novel. It's like this blend of history and myth.
Yeah, like those stories that are so good, they just have to be true on some level.
Right.
All right, so let's get into the story itself. We've got these 108 spirits, each tied to a star of destiny. I mean, that's just such a cool concept, right? Like fate is pulling these rebels together.
It's rooted in Chinese astrology, this idea that our destinies are written in the stars, literally. So each character's fate is intertwined with their star as this element of like mystique, but it also makes you think about, free will versus destiny.
Deep stuff. So they all end up at this outlaw stronghold, Mount Liang. And it's such a diverse group. We've got scholars, fishermen, soldiers, even former government officials.
Right, and that's important. It shows that, like, this desire for justice, this disillusionment with the system, it cut across all levels of society. These weren't just, like, random bandits. They were united by their experiences, by their willingness to fight for something better.
Okay, I'm already hooked. Now, you know I love a good hero story, and one that really caught my eye was Wu Song, the guy who takes down a tiger with his bare hands. I mean, come on,
Yeah.
that's just epic.
Oh, yeah, Wusong is a legend. And that tiger slaying episode, it's more than just brute strength. It's symbolic, like he's striking a blow against all forms of oppression. It elevates him to this, like, folk hero status. He embodies the courage and righteousness that people were craving in a world full of corruption.
Right, it's like he's fighting for everyone who's been pushed around, who feels powerless. And then we have Lin Chong, the skilled warrior who gets framed and forced to become an outlaw. That's a classic tale, right?
Absolutely. Lin Chong's story is all about how power can be abused, how the legal system can be twisted to target anyone who threatens those in control. And his journey from respected official to outlaw, it just shows how corrosive injustice can be. It can push even the most honorable person to seek revenge outside the law.
Yeah, sometimes the system fails and you have to fight back however you can. And then there's Liu Zixin, the rebellious monk who, well, he uproots a tree. That's just pure awesomeness, all right?
Liu Zixin is a force of nature. He brings this energy to the group, this sense of humor, but he's also driven by a strong sense of righteousness. He's a champion of the underdog, always ready to fight for those who are being trampled on, even if it means bending the rules a little.
So we've got the brave warrior, the wronged official, the rebellious monk. Sounds like quite the crew. But it's not just a boys' club up on Mount Liang, right? You mentioned earlier that the portrayal of women in the novel is complex. What did you mean by that?
Well, it's true that Water Margin celebrates this male camaraderie and heroism, but the roles of women are often more confined by the societal expectations of the time.
Yeah, makes sense. It was a different world back then. So who are some of the notable female characters and how do they fit into this world of outlaws and rebellion?
Well, one of the most famous or infamous is Pan Jinlian. She's beautiful, intelligent, but her story is ultimately a tragic one. It's shaped by the limited choices available to women in that era.
So even though we're celebrating these outlaws, we have to remember the context, the social norms of the time.
Exactly. It's important to see the whole picture.
All right, and speaking of seeing the whole picture, we can't forget the central figure, Song Jiang. He seems like a walking contradiction, right? A rebel leader who also craves acceptance from the very system he's fighting against.
He's the heart of the story, and his internal conflict is what drives so much of the drama. He wants justice, but he also longs for recognition, for a place within the established order.
It's like he's torn between two worlds. I can already see how that's going to lead to some tough choices.
Oh, definitely. His struggle is going to have major consequences, not just for him, but for the entire group. And those choices, well, they'll shape the course of the rebellion and ultimately lead to an ending that, well, it's still debated today. So buckle up.
Sounds like we're in for a wild ride. We've got history, we've got folklore, we've got these larger-than-life characters, and at the center of it all, this guy, Song Jiang, wrestling with his own demons.
That's water margin in a nutshell.
I can't wait to see where this goes. Okay, so we left off talking about Song Jiang, this rebel leader who also wants to be part of the system he's fighting. That's got to cause some problems, right?
Yeah, big time. Imagine you're one of those 108 outlaws. You've given up everything. You're risking your life for this cause. And then your leader starts talking about making peace with the enemy.
Yeah, like what's the point of fighting then? Talk about mixed messages.
Exactly. And it reflects this bigger question about rebellion in general. Like, is it about tearing everything down or, can you actually change things from within?
Deep stuff. And while we're on the topic of debates, let's talk about the authorship of Water Margin. You mentioned it's a bit of a mystery, right? Different editions, possible contributors. What's the story there?
Well, it's a fascinating history, with all these different versions floating around for centuries. Some scholars think it started as like a bunch of folk tales and historical accounts that got, woven together over time.
So it evolved, like a living thing almost.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that makes it even more complex. It shows how people's views of the outlaws, of Song Jiang even, changed over time.
Makes you wonder what the original authors intended. Was it a straight-up celebration of rebellion or something more nuanced?
That's the million-dollar question. Some argue it's a critique of authority, encouraging people to, stand up for what's right, even if it means breaking the law.
But then there's also that whole thing about wanting amnesty, wanting to be accepted back into the system. Seems kind of contradictory, right?
Exactly. And that's that tension, that's what makes Water Margins so compelling. It doesn't give you easy answers. It grapples with these big questions about morality and power, and how we fit in.
Okay, I get it. It's not just good guys versus bad guys. It's more human, more realistic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let's not forget how entertaining it is. It's got action, adventure, larger-than-life characters, even a little bit of the supernatural thrown in. It's a story that just pulls you in.
Like a historical action movie almost. And speaking of bringing stories to life, you mentioned Water Margin has inspired tons of adaptations, plays, movies, video games. That's quite a legacy.
Oh, yeah. It shows you how powerful the story is.
Yeah.
It transcends cultures, Like in Japan, for instance, it sparked a whole genre called Tsukuden, which is all about groups of heroes, 108 of them, fighting for justice.
Wow, so they took the concepts and made it their own.
Exactly. And even today, you see echoes of Water Margin everywhere. Kung fu movies, anime. It's seeped into popular culture in a big way.
It's amazing how a story from, centuries ago can still be so relevant. It says something about those themes, right? Rebellion, loyalty, justice.
Absolutely. They're timeless. And Water Margin reminds us that stories have this power to connect us across cultures, across time. Mm-hmm. They let us see the world through different eyes, explore these fundamental questions about what it means to be human.
Okay, we talked a bit about how women are portrayed earlier. Can we dig into that a bit more? Who are some of the other notable female characters, and how do they challenge or, maybe reinforce the traditional roles of women in that era?
Yeah, definitely. While Water Margin does have some, stereotypical views of women, it also has some amazing female characters who defy those expectations. They're strong, resourceful.
Like who? Give us some examples.
Well, there's Sun Ernyang, the innkeeper. She's a master of martial arts and runs a pretty interesting establishment. Let's just say she has a unique way of dealing with troublesome guests.
Oh, it sounds like someone you don't want to mess with. I like her already.
And then you got Gu Dasao, who's fiercely loyal to her husband and fights alongside him in battle. She's skilled with weapons, fearless. She totally challenges that idea of women being, helpless damsels.
So the novel is showing that women are capable of so much more than society gives them credit for.
Exactly. And these strong women, even though they're often operating within the constraints of their roles, they give us a glimpse of what's possible when women have the chance to break free.
It's like a reminder that even in a patriarchal society, women found ways to exert their influence, even if those stories aren't always told.
Right. And it's important for us as, modern readers to see those stories, to recognize the complexity of women's experiences throughout history.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked about rebellion and justice, but eventually even outlaws have to face reality. What happens to Song Jiang and his crew? Do they get what they want, or does it all end in tragedy?
That's where we get to the heart of the ending.
Yeah.
And it's complicated, it's bittersweet, and people have been debating it for centuries.
Okay, spill the beans. What happens to these rebels who dared to challenge the system?
Well, after years of fighting, corrupt officials, defending the oppressed, they're offered amnesty by the emperor. It seems like a win, right? A chance to come back into society, be recognized for what they did.
Wait, so they end up working for the very system they were fighting? That's a twist.
It is, and it's a decision that's caused a lot of debate. Some people see it as a betrayal, like they sold out. Others say it was a smart move, a way to change things from the inside.
Yeah, I can see both sides. It's like, do you keep fighting and risk everything, or do you compromise and hope to make a difference? Tough call.
Right. And the novel doesn't tell you what's right or wrong. It shows you the complexity,
Yeah.
leaves you to decide for yourself.
Okay, so no Hollywood ending then.
No, definitely not. And that's what makes it so powerful. It reflects how messy real life is.
All right, so they get amnesty, but what about Song Jiang? Does he finally get the recognition he's been wanting?
Sadly, no. And this is where the bittersweet part really comes in. Despite everything they did, Song Jiang and a lot of his companions, they meet tragic ends.
No way. What happened?
Some die in battle, but Song Jiang, he gets betrayed and poisoned by, corrupt officials. It just goes to show that even within the system, justice isn't guaranteed.
Wow, that's harsh. So even when you're fighting for what's right, you might not win in the end.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes Water Margin resonate with people even today. It reminds us that the fight for justice is never easy, and sometimes the people who say it the hardest, well, they pay the biggest price.
It's a sobering thought for sure, but it's also inspiring in a way. It's like you have to keep fighting, even when it's hard, even when it seems impossible.
Exactly. And it shows how relevant this story still is. Even though it was written centuries ago, its message about corruption and the struggle for justice, it's still so powerful.
Okay, so we've talked about the plot, the characters, the history, but you mentioned earlier that Water Margin has also had a big cultural impact, not just in China, but around the world.
Oh yeah, it's a story that's captured the imaginations of people across cultures for centuries. It's been adapted and reinterpreted in so many ways. It's incredible.
Okay, so we're back, and we're ready to wrap up our deep dive into Water Margin. We've gone through, the plot and the characters, the historical context, even that, kind of heartbreaking ending. But now I'm curious about its lasting impact, How has this story about outlaws and rebellion kind of rippled through time and influenced culture?
Well, that's where things get really fascinating, because Water Margin isn't just, a story. It's more like a cultural touchstone. It's inspired artists and writers, even revolutionaries, throughout history.
Yeah, I can see that. Give us some examples. How has Water Margin been reinterpreted over the centuries?
Well, we already talked about that Japanese genre, Suikoden, remember. It's directly inspired by Water Margin, with those bands of 108 heroes, each with their own, personalities and backstories, fighting for justice.
Right, right. So it's like Water Margin spawned a whole universe of, outlaw hero stories over in Japan.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just literature, too. You see it in traditional Chinese opera, where they've been performing the story for centuries. And then you have film and television. There are tons of adaptations, everything from those old school kung fu movies to modern day dramas.
Oh, yeah. I can totally picture Wu Song battling that tiger on the big screen.
Oh, yeah. Some epic movie versions of that scene for sure. And don't forget video games. The Suikoden series, for example, it pulls a lot from Water Margin. They have a cast of 108 characters, too, each with special abilities and their storylines all intertwined.
That's crazy. So a novel from, centuries ago is still inspiring entertainment today. Why do you think that is? What makes Water Margin so adaptable and enduring?
I think it taps into this universal desire for justice. This idea of challenging the powerful, finding strength in unity and camaraderie. Those are themes that resonate across cultures throughout history.
Right, it's like a blueprint for rebellion, showing what happens when people band together to fight oppression, no matter like the time or place.
Exactly. And I think that's why it still inspires people, whether it's artists reinterpreting the story or individuals who see connections between the struggles of those outlaws and the challenges we face in our own societies today.
Yeah, it's a reminder that the fight for a more just world is never really over, and stories like Water Margin can give us hope and inspiration, even a sense of how to keep going.
That's a great point. Water Margin isn't just a historical adventure. It's a story that encourages us to, question authority, to fight for what we believe in, and to recognize that real change often requires courage and sacrifice, even a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, I like that, challenging the status quo. Now, I'm curious about how Water Margin has been received throughout history. Has it always been celebrated, or has it faced, controversy and censorship?
Good question. It's had a complicated relationship with authority over the years. Sometimes it's been seen as like a patriotic tale, celebrating those who fight against corruption.
So promoting loyalty to the nation, even if it means speaking out against those in power.
Exactly. But then other times it's been seen as subversive, even dangerous, because it shows rebellion and questions authority. It's been banned or censored in certain periods, seen as a threat to, social order.
So it's like a double-edged sword, right? Can be used to inspire patriotism, but also fuel dissent.
Right. And that duality is part of what makes it so fascinating and enduring. It reflects the complexities of power, the constant struggle between those who want to maintain the status quo and those who are pushing for change.
Yeah, it's a reminder that stories can be powerful tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can reinforce social norms, but also challenge them.
Absolutely. And the fact that Water Margin still sparks these debates, even after all this time, it shows just how relevant it is. It makes us think about uncomfortable truths about our own societies and grapple with questions of power and justice and how far we can go to speak out against what we see as wrong.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Water Margin, what are some key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Well, I hope they understand just how rich and complex this novel is. It's not just some simple adventure. It's a story that explores so much rebellion, loyalty, justice, the desire for both, belonging and change.
It's a story that makes you think critically about those in power, right? It makes you question the systems we live under and recognize that both good and evil exist within each of us.
Right. And I hope listeners are inspired to, explore Water Margin further, whether by reading the book itself or checking out some of the adaptations or even just talking about it with others.
Yeah, this deep dive definitely made me want to check it out myself. Any final thoughts or recommendations for those who want to learn more?
I'd say approach Water Margin with an open mind and be ready to, engage with its complexities. Don't be afraid to question the characters and analyze their moral dilemmas and see the connections between this story and, the world we live in today.
Well said. And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point. There's a whole world of Water Margin out there waiting to be discovered, with its history and characters and timeless themes that are still relevant today.
Thanks for joining us. And keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those deep dives going.
That's right. And we'll catch you next time, folks, on another deep dive.